and retired federal judge Nancy Gertner.
I'm Margery Egan. Then in the second hour, Tufts International Affairs professor Daniel Dresner updates us on the latest in Iran as Trump's war of choice enters its third month. And we'll end the show with you. As King Charles prepares for his first U.S. visit as monarch, what is your take on the British royal family? Do we learn a thing or two about decorum from the royals, or did we make the right choice to buck the king 250 years ago? And maybe with the way things are going with our government, is it time to reconsider joining the Commonwealth of Nations? Weigh in next on Boston Public Radio.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The alleged gunman at the White House Correspondents' Dinner is expected to make his first appearance in federal court today. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports Cole Allen faces charges, including using a firearm during a crime of violence and assault on a federal officer using a dangerous weapon.
The White House says President Trump is, quote, standing by the leadership of the Secret Service and felt agents did an excellent job neutralizing the shooter, according to a senior White House official. The official said Chief of Staff Susie Wiles will be holding meetings this week with Secret Service and Homeland Security officials to, quote, discuss protocol and practices for major events. The 31-year-old suspect allegedly told law enforcement after that he intended to target high-ranking Trump administration officials. According to a U.S. official, Allen's sister told law enforcement that her brother had a tendency to make radical statements, and that his rhetoric referenced a plan to do, quote, something to fix the issues with today's world. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla are scheduled to arrive in the U.S. today for a state visit. British officials say despite the attempted attack on the press dinner over the weekend, the meetings with President Trump will go ahead as planned. The Pentagon has announced another boat strike of alleged drug traffickers. 3 people were killed. NPR's Quill Lawrence reports the U.S. military has killed at least 186 people this way since September.
U.S. Southern Command posted surveillance video on social media showing a small boat exploding into flames. Southcom said it was on a known narco-trafficking route in the eastern Pacific. The Trump administration says it is at war with drug cartels, and that makes it legal to destroy these boats and kill the people on board without trial. There have been more than 50 such strikes in the past 8 months, and in some instances, Southcom has killed shipwreck survivors or simply left them to drown. Critics say this is murder and violates military and maritime law. Coast Guard data show that when boats are interdicted instead of being destroyed, they have evidence of drug trafficking about 75% of the time. Quill Lawrence, NPR News.
Iran's foreign minister is in Moscow for meetings with Russian leaders, but the vital Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, both by Iran and by the U.S. military. That is cutting off vital crude oil supplies from much of the world. Dangerous thunderstorms are sweeping through the central U.S. this morning. Many warnings are in Missouri, southern Illinois, and western Kentucky. There was a tornado warning earlier north of Columbia, Missouri. Over the weekend, powerful tornadoes struck several states, including Texas. Authorities there say 2 people were killed outside Dallas on Saturday night. You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. City officials in Worcester are looking into creating a new sports commission aimed at bringing more athletic events and the economic boost that comes with them to Worcester. The Worcester Guardian reports the bill calls for establishing volunteer Worcester Sports Commission, whose job would be to attract, promote, and support sporting events across the city, from large-scale tournaments to regional competitions. Supporters say such a commission could help Worcester compete more aggressively for events and opportunities that can generate a significant economic impact, especially with events like the NCAA tournaments or boxing matches or even regional tournaments. A super rare split-color lobster is now living in Woods Hole. Fishermen from the Wellfleet Shellfish Company caught a lobster with 2 different colors perfectly split down the middle. One side is dark brown, the other is orange. The Cape Cod Times reports roughly 1 in 50 million lobsters have coloring like this. It's caused by a genetic mutation where 2 eggs absorb into 1 and grow into a lobster with 2 sets of genes. The shellfish company donated the lobster to the Woods Hole Science Institute. The split-color lobster will be on display when the aquarium reopens for renovations. In the meantime, it's living at the Marine Biological Lab. In sports, Red Sox open a series with the Blue Jays in Toronto tonight. Celtics and Bruins are both off until tomorrow. Sunny, low to mid-60s today. Sunny near 60 tomorrow. 59 in Boston, 63 in Springfield. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
This is BPR and GBH and NEPM. Jim, Brady, Margery, Egan. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Tomorrow, it is a twofer at the Boston Public Library, Jim. We have Ask the Governor, Maura Healey, from 11 to noon, and Ask the Mayor, Michelle Wu, from noon to 1, taking our questions and yours. And then on Friday, May Day, we have a special Ken Casey as our co-host show. He, of course, is from the Dropkick Murphys. He's going to feature the D.C. cop Michael Fanone, a survivor of January 6th. And the great Michael Patrick MacDonald wrote a wonderful memoir of South Boston and another book, Easter Rising, about the punk band scene. It's going to be a great show.
It is going to be a great show. How are you, Margery?
I'm excellent, thank you.
Good. So the suspected shooter at this weekend's White House Correspondents' Dinner has been identified, as you know, by a number of anonymous sources as 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen from California. A manifesto allegedly written by him indicates he was targeting the presidential administration, but would harm others based on their decision to attend the speech by, quote, a pedophile, rapist, and traitor, and are thus complicit. So the lines are open this morning for your general reaction to Saturday night. So many people in that room have already been touched by political violence. Kennedy, number of other, Robert Kennedy, obviously, a number of other Kennedys were in the room. Representative Steve Scalise, who you probably remember was shot at a congressional baseball game back in 2017. Erica Kirk, her husband, obviously, was Turning Point USA's Charlie Kirk. And, of course, Trump himself, now the target on a number of occasions of gunfire. By the way, in about 30 minutes, we're going to be joined by USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief, Susan Paige, who was not only at the dinner, but has been at more than 40 dinners in a row and was president of the Correspondents Association in 2000. So have we been completely desensitized to political violence? How are you responding to yet another act of American violence? And if you logged into the website formerly known as Twitter over the weekend, you were awash in conspiracy theories and worse, as is often the case in America in 2026. And our issue with that, by the way, is not to argue that this was staged, which so many thousands of people did on Twitter, but the fact that so many people who are not insane made the case this weekend that the whole thing was staged. What does that say about the state of our democracy and trust in this society? The number is 877-301-8970 to call or text. So what was your reaction to Saturday night, Margery?
Well, it was so weird. I was driving home from somewhere listening to the broadcast of it, and it was all normal at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then I get in the house and I saw that there's been this huge disruption. It was pretty scary. I think, so many people have pointed out, a lot of us have seen the aftermath of these horrors, these shootings elsewhere. And when you have people that usually report on the shootings in a moment where they think they might be the victims of a shooting, it's a pretty strange thing. And of course, everybody had their camera, so you could see it. You could see the president getting rushed out of there, Melania Trump ducking under the table and then getting rushed out of there, Vance.
Kennedy being rushed out of there, leaving his wife, Cheryl Hines, behind by herself to run out. The most incredible
Patel.
video. Well, speaking of that, by the way, I texted you, Zoe, and Jamie because I couldn't believe this was not AI. I'm sure most of you have seen this. Kash Patel, who is still, as of the moment, the head of the FBI, what's his reaction? I assume he jumped into action to lead the charge. What did he do?
Well, there were a lot of pictures of him not jumping to action.
Sat at his table, looking around.
Yeah, and apparently after he was out there, 90 minutes later, he was kind of milling around outside the building as well. So not what you expect from the guy that's the head of the FBI, not at all.
By the way, that's fed some of the people, the conspiracy believers, who think this thing was staged, that the head of the FBI was just sitting there, and that conveniently Trump goes back, does a press conference afterwards, and what does he use the event to advocate for? This is why we need the ballroom, the security, etc. People thought it was all too convenient. And again, we're not here to argue the staging conspiracy thing, but the fact, if you were on Twitter, so many people I follow who are normal, intelligent human beings.
Really?
Were
like who?
Most people I follow are just like people with brains who have interesting perspectives. I cannot tell you how many of these people were making the case that this thing was not real. And again, the issue is not whether it was real. You can believe it was not real. The issue is that so many people who were normal, at least in my estimation, believed it. So your reaction to Saturday night, 877-301-8970.
I also want to mention there were a couple of humorous moments where they showed the video of this older guy just sitting there eating his burrata and cheese, whatever it was. Like there was no problem. And then the guy that used to be the head of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, he apparently was not particularly worked up into a frenzy. He said, well, assessing the evening, he said, on the positive side, it was exciting. No one was killed. It ended early.
Is that literally what he said?
Lloyd Blankfein, yeah. And he said he noted a new litmus test for status among the government elite, whether you were whisked away by the Secret Service or just left there to fend for yourself. And he also asked his table mate if they were going to finish their salad. So I guess he has blood runs cold for Lloyd Blankfein.
Well, there's another line from last night which has been used by about 1,000 people too. The guy who was speaking, no comedian last night, there was the mentalist. I don't even know what the guy's name is. Perlman, is that the guy's name? Perlman, I think.
I don't know.
And he was speaking when the shot was fired. And a lot of people on social media are saying it was a big blow to his credibility because the mentalist did not see it coming, which I think pretty good line. 877-301-8970. But, you know, there was almost, when you heard, there was, I can't remember who from NPR was at the dinner. She was interviewed this morning. My apologies. I was tired. But I'm listening to her being interviewed. And she says, I'm not convinced. I didn't take away that there was chaos, which is what so many people are describing. And to paraphrase what she said, people are so used to there being political violence around so many events in this country that there was almost like this subliminal notion that this is what happens at these kinds of events.
Well, there was a quote from one of the congressmen. And, of course, you know, there's been so many threats of political of violence that people talk about getting to these places and looking immediately where the exits are. Frankly, I started doing that, but they've had to spend millions and millions of more dollars securing for security for Congress people because of the endless death threats that they have endured. And some people, who's the guy that said he dropped out because he had to spend Thanksgiving in a hotel room with his family instead of being home?
I don't know.
Yeah, I should look that up. I just read that this morning. Anyway, violence has been on the rise, and threats of violence have been dramatically on the rise.
And Republicans, by the way, if you read stories this morning, are blaming the Democrats for their rhetoric around Trump. The fact that somebody can say that with a straight face, considering that there has never been a leader, much less a president in this country, who has done more to to include violent rhetoric in virtually everything he talks about than the president of the United States. So 877-301-8970. What was your reaction to Saturday night? John in Westford, you're first. Welcome to the show. Hi, John.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
I think social media and even actually mainstream media, they have to be reeled in. I don't know if you saw Jimmy Kimmel's comment the other night about Melania looking beautiful. She had the glow of an expectant widow, like she's like it's
I didn't hear
normal.
that.
I feel, yeah, and I mean it's just, and you.
That was
hear these,
before.
like, shakes.
That was before the event.
Yeah,
so
he
we
did
should
a
point
fake
out.
comic presentation since there was no comic at the dinner. He did a 90-second, I think it was roughly 90-second comic thing. And again, that was before the shooting. But go ahead, John.
Yeah, but it's just even before the shooting, is that a thing to say? I mean, you have a play in Shakespeare on the Common in Central Park, and they're dressed as Trump, and they're et tu bruteing him, and you have Madonna and Kathy
Whose rhetoric?
Griffin
I hear
holding
you.
up this
I hear you, John. And
severed
I
head.
didn't. John, whose rhetoric do you think is more dangerous? The guy with the biggest bully pulpit in the world, or a comedian on late night television?
Give me an example of his rhetoric asking for violence against a specific person, and I'll give you 5.
Well, he's done it at rallies. He's
violent-
he's urged people at rallies when he's campaigning to go punch out people who are in the room. And beyond individuals, his violent January 6th, on and on and on. This is a guy who
Now, on January 6th, did you actually see the unclipped version where he's saying peacefully go down and protest in a peaceful...
Oh,
John,
John,
hold
John.
on. John, he just pardoned people who tried to murder police officers. That's not a peaceful kind of guy, right?
And I can show you Biden. I mean, we can play...
Hey, John, one last thing.
Biden
One
did
last thing.
all of
Would
the
you agree
drug
that
dealers.
wiping out the whole civilization of Iran is a fairly violent representation, even if he didn't name all 90 million Iranians?
He's been nothing but praise the
John,
Persian
thanks.
people.
We got it. John, thanks for the call. We appreciate it. Other than saying he wants to wipe out their civilization. 877-301-8970.
He said January 6th was a day of love.
Yeah. Dave in West Roxbury.
By the way, we're going to have one of those police officers who was almost murdered
Michael
with
Fanone.
us on Friday, who can talk about if he felt that it was a peaceful moment. And the president waited hours before he called off. He watched on television what was happening to those police officers, and he did it for 3 hours, I think?
Dave in West Roxbury, welcome to the show. Hi.
Good morning. I just wanted to get it on the record, Jim. So do you think this was staged, or you think this was an actual attempt on Trump's life?
I don't think it was staged.
And Margery, same question to you, please.
I don't think it was staged.
I don't think it was staged.
Okay.
No.
But what's your
Okay,
point?
good. Okay, I'm glad we agree on that. Okay. Oh, no, I just want to make sure that everyone knows where we stand, because it's important to take a stand. I think this is the third time they've tried to kill the president. Do I think the rhetoric that Democrats use is leading to it? Yes, I do. But Trump's just is worse, as you said. He is worse. Doesn't make it right for either side, though. That's my opinion. I don't think Jimmy Kimmel will make that joke again. But, he made that joke after Trump had been shot a year and a half ago.
You mean in Butler?
So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Again, but
So-
David, I'm not. I didn't hear. Actually, I did hear the Jimmy Kimmel thing, and I missed that reference that John and you are speaking about. But I take your word for it. But at the same time, he's got a modest audience on late night television and people the next morning on YouTube, versus the most powerful person with the biggest bully pulpit in the world, who, in my opinion, trades in violence. So I hear you. Dave, thank you for the call. Appreciate it. I want to reiterate, if you just turned in, the reason we mentioned the staging is not because either of us think it was staged, but because there is so much conversation going on from, again, in my opinion, normal people, not the usual conspiracy nuts suggesting that it was.
Well, I think the shooter himself in his so-called manifesto expressed surprise that he could just walk into the Washington Hilton with all that weaponry. But he was guest. He rented a room there, so they don't go through your suitcases usually when you go in to stay at a hotel, although maybe they should if the president's going to be there 2 days later. But, I want to mention one thing. I think that the president is really perfected, if you want to call it that, which is insults to people. He appeared on 60 Minutes last night with the reporter Norah O'Donnell. This, of course, was after what happened on Saturday. And here's the exchange between O'Donnell and President Trump after she read part of the shooter's manifesto. Quote, "I am no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes." That was part of this so-called manifesto. Here it is.
What's your reaction
Well,
to that?
I was waiting for you to read that because I knew you would, because you're horrible people, horrible people. Yeah, he did write that. I'm not a rapist. I didn't rape anybody.
Oh,
I'm not a
do you think he was
pedophile.
referring
Excuse me,
to you?
Excuse me. I'm not a pedophile. You read that crap from some sick person. I got associated with all stuff that has nothing to do with me. I was totally exonerated. You should be ashamed of yourself reading that, because I'm not any of those things.
Mr. President,
and I
these
was
are
never,
the gunman's words.
Excuse me. You shouldn't be reading that on 60 Minutes. You're a disgrace.
877-301-89. How many male reporters are disgraces, by the way? I can't remember.
I think he's called Jonathan Carl from ABC a disgrace.
A disgrace?
He tends to go after women more, but I think he's said nasty things to everybody. And those were perfectly legitimate questions. This is what this gunman wrote. It was part of what his supposed motive was. And the president has not been exonerated, by the way. There was a 13-year-old girl who accused him, of which there was a settlement made. And
even if there wasn't a 13-year-old, there's nothing about exoneration in the Epstein files.
Well, I just want to point that out. And we should also point out that a civil jury found him guilty of sexual abuse, which would have been rape in Massachusetts, because the laws are different about what rape is here than they are in New York.
877-301-8970. Where are we going next, friends? Please tell us. We're going to Carol in Rhode Island. Hi, Carol. Welcome.
Hi, Jim and Margery.
Hey.
I just wanted to make a comment about that whole Democrats are somehow, want to assassinate the president. There were 3 individual people who tried to assassinate the president. I really don't know what their political background is. But the Democrats are the people all over this country who have been going to No Kings rallies. Those are Democrats, most likely all of them. I know I am, and have gone to every one of them, who are protesting Trump's unconstitutional behavior. That's the Democrats. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, Carol, thank you very much for the call. By the way, I hadn't heard, I'm sure I just missed it, that some Republicans are suggesting that all of the would-be assassins were Democrats. The thing I was mentioning before was the suggestion by a lot of Republicans in the last 36 hours that Democratic rhetoric directed at Trump was responsible for the violence. Our number is 877-301-8970. I'm sorry, Margery.
What we know about this shooter, besides the rapist stuff that I just mentioned, that Leonard O'Donnell mentioned with the president, was he was upset. This is according to his manifesto. He was upset about detention camps. He was upset about, he called them fishermen executed. The Trump administration said they were drug dealers that were educated, that were shot, blown up, I guess, in those boats. He was upset about the school children blown up. We presume that has to do with the Iran war. He was upset about teenage girls abused by many criminals in the administration. Those are his words. And starved children. I don't know if he means in terms of cuts to programs. I don't know what that means.
One of the things that I was really troubled by in terms of the reporting about his remarks afterwards is virtually everybody mentioned and some praised his praise for the Secret Service and law enforcement. How do you not put that in the context of what you mentioned before, his pardoning of all of these people, some of whom attempted to kill law enforcement people on his watch?
That was a ridiculous thing he did. There's just no excuse for it.
No, but my point is, you can't just report and say, good for him, as many commentators have said about his comments praising the Secret Service performance and law enforcement. And by the way, they do deserve praise. The fact this guy is alive and will stand trial and hopefully, when questioned, provide more information that hopefully can cause future violence to be avoided. I don't know if that's unduly optimistic. Is amazing to me that he's alive and not shot, don't you think?
Yeah, and he planned it enough to be a guest in the hotel.
Yeah.
So presumably he had ways to get down to this event that it wasn't coming through the front door. We had to show a ticket like the other people had to do.
But even though, by the way, you've read the stories about the reduced security, which is another thing that those who think it was staged argue. The security was lower, and a number of journalists talk about the fact that they had credentials that were barely checked as they went in, which is fairly unusual for a presidential event. Eugene in Randolph, welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
Of course.
It amazed me when some people would say, do you believe that it was fake? Okay, this is a guy who called everything fake, but this is a guy who gives fingers to on a plane to one of the workers.
He did.
This is a guy who called the Somalian people garbage. This is a guy who said Robert Mueller, he good as die, or Bob Radner die, and then people that support guy like that would question anybody doesn't think since 2016 this guy turned the country to a bloodbath. If he doesn't win, turn the country into a bloodbath. I'm thinking, who are these people who think this guy, he's the one that made this country like that since 2016? I don't get it.
That was quite a call, Eugene. Thank you. Call us again. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970 is the number.
A lot of our texters think this was staged.
I'm telling you. And by the way, I bet you if you match the texters to prior texts from these people, they're not typical conspiracy theorists. That was my experience Saturday night and Sunday morning.
Well, the only thing that I thought made any sense at all, and I'm not still buying it, is the idea that they knew this guy was in the hotel. That's the only thing.
What do you mean?
That there was some notification that a guy came in with knives, guns, and a long rifle, and checked into the Hilton Hotel. But I don't buy that either. But that's one of the only things. The idea that you could put someone up to do this and write his manifesto.
Well, you know what? I told you. Some of the other arguments that most commonly made. One is Patel just sitting at the table. He is still the head of the FBI, at least for the time being.
Well, if you had a lot of cocktails, you might not be in a position to race around quickly, Jim.
When you've seen the video of Trump et al. Being notified about this, Melania looks like, oh my God.
She went right into the
table. The woman who's head of the Correspondents Association puts her hand to her mouth like, oh my God. And Trump just sits there. Now, some argue that's because he's such a strong character. He was unfazed. The conspiracy, well, they're not ordinarily. Those who are arguing this thing was staged think that's further evidence.
However, my rebuttal to that would be, we all know that the award for photography was going to go to the photographer who took a picture of Trump standing there like nothing was going on when the guy behind him had some kind of heart attack or medical emergency. Everybody else is scrambling around and Trump is looking in the other direction, straight ahead with his arms by his side. So I don't know. Maybe
that picture, if people haven't seen that picture, it's even better.
Picture.
He's staring straight ahead, and not only is the guy on the floor, the only thing you see from the guy who passed out on the floor are his legs up in the air. Either a member of the cabinet or somebody has raised his legs. I guess you're supposed to have your legs above your heart or something.
Right. And
when you pass out, so you see his legs up in the air, and Trump just staring off into the wilderness.
Another weird thing in that, when you see the video, is that RFK Jr., our big health nut guy, he walked out of the room.
He did walk out of the room.
That was kind of weird.
And he walked out of the room. He didn't walk. He was ushered out of the room by a number of Secret Service people, leaving Cheryl Hines, who was his wife, 10 feet behind, with no security, nothing, running to keep up.
Well, there were some people who pointed out that the problem for the wives or the spouses were they weren't on the on the list of cabinet members, so they kind of got lost in the shuffle.
I just want to remind you that Susan Paige, who was the head of the Washington Bureau for USA
she was
Today,
there.
She's going to join us in about 20 minutes. She was at the dinner. Who is sitting at her table? The Speaker of the House,
Mike Johnson,
is with her. She's been to 45 of these in a row, including serving as head of the Correspondents Association. So we're going to talk to Susan Paige after we speak to Judge Gardner.
Yeah, he was whisked out very quickly, too. Okay, we have...
you have no idea what we're doing?
No, I know exactly what we're doing. So. We are out of time.
Yeah.
We are going to talk with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner coming up after this about, things, a lot of spats going on at the Supreme Court. We're going to find out if the Supreme Court is totally falling apart, and a bunch of other legal news. I'm Margery Egan. He's Jim Browder. You're listening to BPR and GBH and NEPM, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
In the 1990s, a new regulatory system was intended to end overfishing, but New Bedford's fishing tycoon, Carlos Rafael, exploited it to accumulate even more boats and power. I'm Ian Koss. Hear how these moves grew his empire and made him a target for the feds on Catching the Codfather, Part 4, Mosquitoes on the Balls of an Elephant. tonight at 9 on GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And M&M Skylights, installing and servicing the full range of commercial and residential Velux skylight products. More information about their installation process and consultations can be scheduled at mmskylights.com. And Rogers Fish Company, founded by Roger Berkowitz, offering an array of New England seafood and entrees shippable anywhere in the U.S. More at rogersfishcompany.com.
Welcome back to BPR and GBH and NEPM. Margery Egan, Jim Browdy, streaming youtube.com/GBH News. Tomorrow, first hour, Governor Healy is with us at the library for Ask the Governor. Second hour, Mayor Wu is with us, obviously, for Ask the Mayor. So that's the whole show. Then on Friday, May 1st, May Day, Ken Casey, leader of the Dropkick Murphys, is our co-host. He has booked a guest, Michael Fanone, who I'm dying to meet. One of the truly impressive survivors, law enforcement officer of January 6th, Michael Patrick MacDonald, and more. Now, for the latest iteration of On the Docket, we're joined on Zoom, whatever it's called, via Zoom, thank you, by retired federal judge Nancy Gertner. Judge Gertner is a senior lecturer at Harvard Law School and a BPR contributor. Judge Gertner, good morning. Good to talk to you.
Good morning.
Hi, Judge Gertner. So we were just making a couple of jokes at the expense of the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, about how at the shooting incident at Saturday night, he was the head of the FBI. Everybody's scrambling around. He's kind of just
Are you predicting something?
Oh, no. No.
Others are.
No, he was just sitting at his table, not reacting to anything that was going on. And apparently outside the Hilton Hotel, he was just kind of milling around like he was, regular Joe instead of the head of the FBI. And then, of course, there's been all this reporting in the Atlantic and elsewhere about how he's having a drinking problem and how SEAL Team 6 practically, I'm exaggerating there, but they had to come in with crowbars to get him out of his hotel room because he was sung hungover, he couldn't wake up, et cetera. So the question is, does it matter in terms of the functioning of the FBI and their efficiency and their ability to do their job when the guy that's running it appears to be rather compromised?
Dysfunctional.
Right. Of course it matters. But of course it mattered that he was picked to be the leader of the FBI when he, as I recall, talked about tearing the building down.
Right.
So the first question is whether he should have been picked to be the head of the FBI at all, and then it's really, we focus on the latest crisis, but you've forgotten that he was the one who identified the shooter in the Charlie Kirk murder.
That's right.
Before they actually have
That's
one.
right.
Who identified? I believe he also, I think this is right, also jumped the gun on the Brown shooter. So he's. Even if he were sober in these incidents, these were incidents that were troubling.
So how compromised, I guess, obviously, it's better, you need a leader who's competent, and he clearly appears not to be. How compromised is the FBI in its ability to do what the FBI is charged with doing? We have to add to this discussion the fact that he's dumped a lot of careerists who have spent their whole lives there doing really important work devoted to this country, because they had the audacity to follow orders and participate in an investigation of Donald Trump, as the boss told them to do.
It's more than that. People who know about the workings of the FBI and about the workings of the DOJ say that the mission has become this, revenge mission, and that other parts of law enforcement are neglected. In other words, we all can say it's wrong to have fire the FBI agents who were involved in the January 6th investigations, because after all, they were doing what they were told to do. But it says something about what is not being done in the Bureau, because he becomes a shill for the president. And that's a big deal. And the best measure of it being a big deal are in the situations in which there was a genuine, a murder, as to which there was no ambiguity, and he messed that up in terms of how he dealt with the public. So it's not, while we focus on the latest problem, but it's really deeper than that.
Well, I also think, Judge Gertner, we probably wouldn't have seen the former head of the FBI, the late Robert Mueller, at the Poodle Room in Vegas, having to read about the Poodle Room or Kash Patel.
Or drunk at the Olympics with the hockey team. We're talking.
Right.
We're talking to Nancy Gardner. Judge Gardner, I don't understand the Supreme Court's decision not to take this case out of Ludlow, Massachusetts, around schools, their relationship to the parents of a young student there. Could you explain the facts in this case and try to explain to us why the Supreme Court decided not to take this?
Two different opinions, seems like.
Yeah, in light of a decision they rendered in a similar case out of California. I'm not explaining this well, but hopefully you
No,
will.
well, I mean, the Ludlow case, as I understand it, was a situation in which the school respected the middle schoolers' self-identification as, I think, trans and queer. I think
I think you're right. Yeah.
And the parents sued because they believed that the school should not have kept that information from them. And yes, the court had ruled in a similar case on the emergency docket, I believe, not a formal opinion.
I think you're right, out of California.
Yeah. So, but let's sort of step back. I mean, the Supreme Court doesn't have to take every hot button cultural issue in the galaxy.
But if they've ruled on this virtually the same issue, if they've ruled in one direction on a California case,
they ruled in the emergency. But they ruled in the emergency docket.
Yeah, but
to some degree, did they stop this on an emergency basis?
Yes. In California, they stopped it, and by not taking the case out of Ludlow, they allowed it. Which emergency docket or not, and I understand. Well, I sort of understand the how that it's not well, I don't know if it is considered a formal decision, but a shadow docket.
I mean, there's considerable controversy about the status of emergency docket decisions. So one possibility is that they say, we're going to deal with this in the other case, and we'll deal with it in an informed, fully briefed way. We don't have to necessarily take every case popping up around the country. That's one thing. But people have forgotten that the Supreme Court, would not necessarily wallow in every hot button cultural issue in the country. This is a court, because it is so aggressively right wing, has chosen to involve itself in things that other courts would not necessarily have involved itself in, particularly on an emergency docket basis, rather than when there are considered briefs and arguments and all of that.
I just want to ask you a side issue question. I probably asked you this before, but it really has bothered me that the government has put itself in front of parents in terms of giving medical care they believe that their children need, like puberty blockers in trans cases. So in this case about the Ludlow case, the student's parents sued, claiming the school's actions violated the parents' 14th Amendment rights to direct the education and upbringing of their children. So if the 14th Amendment says the parents have the right to the education upbringing of their children, why don't parents have the right to make medical decisions for their children when their children are minors and their children and the doctors involved think the children need puberty blockers?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, so there is, generally speaking, a 14th Amendment right over time articulated in state courts under the state constitution to the parents' right to make decisions with respect to their children, decisions about religion, decisions about all sorts of things. So that's the right of the parents. And what you're saying is, what's the difference between the medical treatment and the identification issue? Arguably, the medical treatment, if it is backed by a doctor, should have more heft than just a middle school's identification one way or the other. I mean, that's what you were suggesting?
Yes.
I mean, I think, as I said, this is a court that has been willy-nilly involving itself, beginning with reversing Roe v. Wade, in the culture wars. And that was not necessary.
Yeah.
Other courts have not done that. Although this isn't on your agenda, there's an amazing development. Jesse Wegman, who used to be one of the opinion writers for the New York Times, has moved to the Brennan Center, the Supreme Court project. And part of the reason he did so is because you got a sense that he was on the one hand, on the other hand with the New York Times, that he needed to make sure that wasn't a question of balance. It was a question of sort of tempering his criticism of the Supreme Court. So he wrote an opinion that opinion piece now as a guest, as a guest writer, called "Is the Supreme Court Coming Apart at the Seams?"
Yes.
But in his Brennan Center article, he says the Supreme Court is badly, dangerously broken. The list of the Roberts Clause offenses is the so-called shadow docket, the flouting of the most basic ethical standards, the invention of new doctrines in order to overturn, almost always on partisan lines, acts of Congress or court's own precedents that have survived for generations, and a string of destructive, destabilizing rulings that cannot be squared with any reasonable reading of constitutional text and history. I mean, you get a sense that he left the New York Times in order to do something that we've talked about before, which is that when you ask about a particular opinion, you say, well, here's the rationale for it. The story is a bigger story and a much more troubling story.
Well, can we talk? He, in this piece yesterday in the New York Times, talks about public comments made by two justices, Sotomayor, who publicly criticized an emergency docket ruling by Brett Kavanaugh. That was the thing we have talked to you about several times, basically allowing racial profiling by ICE and similar people. And her comment about Kavanaugh was, this is from a man, this is Sotomayor speaking, whose parents were professionals and probably doesn't really know any person who works by the hour or the piece like I do. And he also criticized more harshly Clarence Thomas for a speech he gave at the University of Texas at Austin on April 15th about how dangerous progressivism is. Here's a little piece of what Thomas had to say.
The century of progressivism did not go well. The European system that Wilson and the progressives scolded Americans for not adopting, which he called nearly perfect, led to the governments that caused the most awful century that the world has ever seen. Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and Mao all were intertwined with the rise of progressivism, and all were opposed to the natural rights on which our Declaration are based.
By the way, Wegman goes ahead to say that the Sotomayor thing is a minor sin, but she apologized. He doesn't use the expression sin, I'm doing it. But the Thomas thing is a major sin for which he did not apologize. What's your reaction
like
to what
Stalin was a progressive?
What's your reaction to what Wegman has to say?
I think he's absolutely right. But also there's a footnote, a parenthetical, by the way, in it that says only women apologize. Mark, you got that. I mean, I understand. She apologizes. Sure, she shouldn't have taken a direct stab at Kavanaugh. There's no question about that. By the way, her comment was the obverse of what O'Connor said about Justice Marshall. And what she said is after he died, she said he was so important to the court because he brought to the table experiences that none of the other judges had. And that is effectively what she was saying, although, she said it as a pointed attack. And so that was the problem. Whereas he was attacking, first of all, Wegman describes this as the historical illiteracy of these claims. The progressive era allowed American voters to vote directly for senators, gave women the right to vote. I mean, what he is attacking is extraordinary. He apologizes to no one. Hers was a pointed comment about Kavanaugh. His is essentially an attack on moderate to left Democrats entirely. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. I was asked at a program at Harvard about a week ago, that was about what's the difference between this court and the Brennan and Warren courts, for example. Is this just another version of what we've seen? And it actually is not. One, those courts chose not to wade into every cultural issue. Two, the emergency docket, as the New York Times article of about a week ago suggests, the emergency docket is being manipulated by the chief to keep certain issue, to much harsher with respect to Biden than they were with respect to Trump. And And the alignments of this court are political alignments. The Warren and Brennan courts would be occasionally 5-4, and the 5-4 mixes were always different. This court is much more politically aligned than you've ever seen before, and the extraordinary arrogance of Justice Thomas's comments. It's almost as if it's okay to challenge a whole swath of the political spectrum for which he doesn't have to apologize. And Sotomayor made a pointed comment about an individual for which he does have to apologize. I mean, it's quite extraordinary.
By the way, in that same speech, he went out of his way to praise Harlan Crow, the guy who his...
throw it in your face kind of thing.
Essentially given him many, many gifts, the vast majority of which were unreported, we learn, until, was it ProPublica? Whoever it was.
Right. No, I mean, this is really in your face, is the way he's behaving. In your face with respect to the ethical rules, in your face with respect to precedents. And so, apropos of your comment about transgender issues, I mean, I think it's a good thing if they stop wading into that territory and allow the lower courts to do their jobs. Because essentially they have an agenda which is quite clear.
But you don't think they're going to stay out of this. You just think, I thought you were suggesting they'll use either maybe the California case or some other case.
Right. I would hope that they stay out of it, is what I'm
that.
saying. I would hope that they would stay out of it. I mean, one of the things we learned from the reporting in the New York Times about the EPA ruling during Biden, when the judges decided to immediately get involved in reversing a Biden policy, is that they're choosing to disrupt and they're choosing to deal with these issues. I hear the music, and so I have to leave.
Judge Gertner, it's great to see you.
You're the only guest that ever picked up on that, Judge Gertner. Good for you. Thank you.
Very subtle. Very
Talk
subtle.
to you soon. Thanks.
Okay. We have been speaking with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner, senior lecturer at Harvard Law School, BPR contributor. Thank you very much, Judge Gertner. Coming up after the break, USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Paige was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and just wrote a book about the Queen of England, and Charles is there today. She's next on BPR, GBH, and NEPM.
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, in late 1970s New York, artists and musicians built a downtown scene that wanted no part of the mainstream. Coined No Wave, it was abrasive, anti-commercial, and defiant. Adele Berthet joins us to talk about No New York, her memoir of that world and the women who helped shape it. Plus, National Youth Poet Laureate Evan Wang on Slow Burn, his first poetry collection. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And Direct Federal Credit Union, a Needham-based financial institution providing loans, saving solutions, and financial wellness resources for members across every stage of life. Learn more by visiting direct.com. Direct Federal, member NCUA.
And Schneider Electric, providing energy technology and sustainability advisory services to help the Boston Athletic Association shape more sustainable events for athletes, fans, and the community. Learn more at se.com.
Welcome back to BPR and GBH and NEPM. I'm Jim Browdy. She's Margery Egan. Streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Tomorrow it's a twofer at the library. The Governor, Maura Healey, will join us for the first hour, taking your questions and ours. Second hour, Mayor Michelle Wu will join us, taking our questions and yours. Susan Paige is USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief, has attended every White House Correspondents' Dinner since 1980. She served as president of the association in 2000. She joins us now on Zoom to discuss this weekend's shooting at the dinner. She was in the room when it happened, and she's talking to us on the day, as you know, that King Charles arrives in the United States for his first visit as king. And speaking of monarchs, Susan is the author of a terrific new book. It's called The Queen and Her Presidents, about Queen Elizabeth and her relationship with 13 United States presidents. I have to say, I don't know why, but while the stories about the presidents are great, my favorite anecdote, I told Margery this, is when little 7-year-old Teddy Kennedy is dancing with the 13-year-old princess. It's incredible. And if you need even more to admire Susan Paige, you'll remember she moderated the 2020 VP debate between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, you know, the one with the fly. In any case, Susan Paige, the book is fabulous. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey, Jim, it's my pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, congratulations on, you've written so many books, but this is wonderful, so well reported, and so many great anecdotes. It was like a page turner, even though it wasn't a murder mystery. So tell us, Susan Paige, what was it like for you on Saturday night?
Well, it was an evening not like all the others, right? After dozens of these dinners, there's kind of a template, you know what's going to happen, but we didn't. We'd had the presentation of colors, we had the national anthem, we sat down and started eating the salad course, and suddenly there was the sound of gunfire. It sounded like it was right outside the door. It was outside the door, but up a level as it turned out. And then shouts of get under the tables. I was at the USA Today table with Speaker Mike Johnson. He had just stepped away to go to the men's room, so close to where the shooter was, but his wife was still at the table. She jumped under the table with the rest of us and started to lead a prayer. And I can tell you, I bet there were more than one person in that room praying out loud or silently as we tried to figure out what in the world was happening.
You know, many of your colleagues and contemporaries were very critical of the Correspondents Association for inviting Trump. The president is invited every year. As president, he has not agreed to attend until this year. Did you have any mixed feelings about Donald Trump being invited, obviously based upon his relentless criticism of the most responsible media in this country?
I had no qualms about it. It's the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We always invite the president. One of the justifications for the dinner is that it is an assertion that while the press corps and the president, many presidents have big conflicts, that there is kind of an overriding respect for the role of a free press in a democracy. So I was glad that President Trump agreed to attend this, the first time he's agreed to attend, even though we were expecting him to deliver a speech that was likely to denounce all of us around the room.
What do you think would have happened? One more minute on this because we want to get to your book. And it's that, what do you think would have happened? Again, a letter signed by many of your colleagues were suggesting that at least from the podium, the head of the Correspondents Association had to make a strong statement. Others were suggesting that you and your colleagues, not you particularly, but your colleagues walk out of the room when Trump was speaking. What do you think the reaction, had his comments been as critical as some were projecting, would have been, Susan Paige?
We're reporters. We're not advocates. We're advocates for a free press, but I would have listened to what he had to say. You know, it's your choice not to applaud. But I wouldn't have walked out. At the USA Today table, we were giving out these little pens with the First Amendment on them. You know, that seemed appropriate to me. And so, I'm not. I was not dismayed by going to the dinner and waiting to hear what it was President Trump had to say.
Oh, let's get to your fantastic book here. Can we move on for the dinner
We
now
can
at this point?
indeed.
So what I really loved about it was I think a lot of us have dismissed Queen Elizabeth. Okay, she's over there, head of state, doesn't really have any power, not making any decisions. But you talked about how really she was, in her own way, very influential. What did you mean?
You know, Margery, I think a lot of Americans think of her as a stoic lady in a colorful hat.
Yes.
Right? Doing that weird, that weird wave they do. It's like, that's what people think. And the reason what sparked me to do the book was, so she dies, and I'm reading her obits, and the obits all say, and she met with 13 sitting presidents, which is, by the way, more presidents than anyone from anywhere has ever met with. And then they stop. There's like a period at the end of the sentence. And my question was, okay, what happened? You meet with 13 presidents, maybe stuff happens. And it turned out quite a bit of stuff happened. And I also, when I was trying to figure out if there was a book here, I found a quote from Bill Clinton in his memoirs that is the smartest, most perceptive characterization of the Queen ever, which was, he said, if not for the circumstance of her birth, she could have been a diplomat or a politician, but as it was, she had to be both without seeming to be either.
Yeah.
That was her gift. She was not influential with every president, but there were several times during her reign where she did important things that changed the course of history.
You know,
like what?
Go ahead.
Like she helped facilitate convincing the United States to side Great Britain in the war in the Falklands, for instance.
You know, throughout this book, we had Joe Nye in the studio a bunch of years ago from the Kennedy School, who I believe is responsible for coining the phrase soft power a while ago, and we talked about that with him. I am in that, Margery was being polite to me, there's nobody who has been as unkind to the Queen
disgraceful
as I.
Horrible.
And I have to say, while I'm still not crazy about the monarchy as an institution, my appreciation of what she's done is totally changed after having finished your book. And it's because of the soft power thing. She is like elevated it to an art form, did she not?
Yeah, Joe Nye did originate the full concept of soft power in the phrase, and he was in fact one of the first people I interviewed when I started the book. And he agreed with the premise that she is the epitome of soft power. And you know, in that way, although they're very different, she and Barbara Bush, who was the subject of my first book, were alike in that they were underestimated in public and enormously influential in private. Queen Elizabeth never negotiated a trade deal. And sometimes when she met with U.S. presidents when things were rough, they wouldn't even talk about whatever the issue was at hand. But she encouraged the United States to focus on the long haul, on the long view, on the shared language and culture and values between the two countries. And at a time like this, when our relationships are pretty strained, that can be enormously important for both countries.
You know, I don't know if you're frustrated or not. After doing all this incredible research and writing, of course, before I read the whole book, which I did, I go right to the table of contents and look up Trump and then go right to those pages. Can you describe the conversation between Trump and Queen Elizabeth when he's trying to figure out who her favorite president was? I mean,
so, Jim, you have failed to do the classic Washington read,
which is
you go to the index and you look up your own name.
Believe me, I did, but I don't think
Yeah.
I met the Queen though. But
You
like
didn't. My apologies for not working you in there somewhere.
So, how about that
you know,
conversation between Trump and the Queen?
So this is great. So it's the 2019 state dinner. And Trump is in his element because he adores the British royal family and he loved Queen Elizabeth, and so did his mother. I mean, he grew up loving Elizabeth. So they're at this dinner, and he does what I'm sure, I would bet, no other president ever did, which was insist the Queen tell him which president was her favorite. And of course, Queen Elizabeth, who had a lifetime of training in avoiding saying things, answering questions she didn't want to answer, didn't answer. She said, all the presidents were wonderful, not really what she thought. I liked all of them. That's not really true. And he marveled at her facility in dodging the question. But then he told me in the interview I did with him for the book that later he was given to understand that Elizabeth did have a favorite president, and it was him.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty unlikely based on your reporting, is it not, Susan Paige?
I think that, the Queen never said who her favorite was, but I do think her favorite was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, they had the bond over the horses.
Horses.
Yeah.
They wrote these letters to each other after he was out of power, after he left the White House. And she didn't keep up a correspondence with every president, but she did with Reagan because they liked each other. And at the Reagan Library, I was reading these letters back and forth, and they're all like, I rode my horse today, it was so nice to ride my horse. Oh, I fell off my horse last week, I hurt my wrist. Oh, I heard your horse died, I'm so sorry. Yes, my horse died too, and I loved him. It was really, you could tell that this was a true bond.
But you know, when you say, and obviously this we knew before the book, that she doesn't make political statements, that we never know how to pronounce it. Is it brooch? Is that how you say what you wear?
Brooch, yeah.
That brooch thing was a pretty powerful, subtle statement. Can you explain that to people?
Yeah, it took my breath away.
Amazing.
The story.
Yeah.
So first of all, the first time the Obamas met with the Queen Elizabeth, Michelle Obama bought this pin at the Tiny Jewelry Box, which is a fancy jewelry store in downtown D.C., and gave it to the Queen. Now, first of all, would you give jewelry to the Queen of England who has the crown jewels? I ask you.
No.
Okay. Got to question that life choice. But anyway, so she wears it the next night at the reciprocal dinner. The state dinner's that night, and then the U.S. Embassy has a reciprocal dinner the next night, and she wears it to the reciprocal dinner for the Obamas, which the Obamas appreciated, and then it's never seen again because, she has her own jewelry, which is pretty spectacular. 7 years pass. It is the day that Trump arrives in England for the first time as president. She's meeting with two world religious leaders. They come out to have their picture taken, and on her dress is the Michelle Obama pin.
You have no doubt that how intentional that was. Is that a fair statement?
I mean, she might as well have had a sideboard. What do they call those signs?
A sandwich board. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Susan Paige, the book is The Queen and Her Presidents by, of course, Susan Paige, we're talking to now. You mentioned the astute observation from Bill Clinton before, but I get the sense from the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, she thought H.W. Bush was pretty great, war hero and all that. Babe, she grew up in World War II, but that she was a little bit suspicious of Bill Clinton not being kind of to the manner born.
She was suspicious. She and Bill Clinton had a problematic relationship from the start, starting with the Brits searching their files for dirt on Clinton from his time as a Rhodes Scholar during the Vietnam War. And when I interviewed Bill Clinton and also separately Hillary Clinton for the book, both of them happened to mention this incident.
Yeah.
Insisting that they didn't have a grudge, but it's clear that neither of them had exactly forgotten it. And they had a series of other times when they were at cross purposes. You remember when Clinton gave a visa to a leader of the IRA, which very much disturbed the British. It was a big breach for the British for him to have done that. He pursued the peace negotiations with Northern Ireland, which the British government and the palace thought were not a good idea. Now, it ended in the Good Friday Agreement, which was a positive thing. And they agree now that that was a good thing and maybe couldn't have been done without Clinton. But at the time, it was a source of enormous tension. So the chapter of the Clinton, chapter about Clinton and the Queen, I titled Hard Feelings, because over and over again, they had some hard feelings.
In addition to, while you make clear that the belief is that Ronald Reagan was her favorite president for some of the reasons we talked about.
He's a movie star, too, Jim.
Well, it's also pretty, and apparently she had seen his movies. She's a big movie fan, She apparently had very warm feelings for President Obama, too. And speaking of glowing praise, when you used the Clinton quote a minute ago, was it at Shimon Peres's funeral that if you don't mind, share what Obama, which I had not recalled, what Obama did at the funeral of Shimon Peres when he spoke.
This was quite amazing. I covered Obama, and he does not give false praise, even though everyone in Washington gives false praise. Believe me, it's like it's in the drinking water. Do you want some false praise? Jim and Margery, you have the best radio show in the world.
Well, thank you. We sort of,
absolutely
in the world.
Thank you.
By the way, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
I'm sure you do. Thank you.
Barack Obama would not have done that. But when Obama gave the eulogy for Shimon Peres, he said, and I talked to his speechwriter, Ben Rhodes, about how this language got put in the speech, and it was by Obama. Obama put in the speech, I've had the privilege of meeting three giants of the 20th century, Shimon Peres, Nelson Mandela, and Queen Elizabeth.
Wow.
It's just incredible.
Wow. I gotta say the Queen returned the favor because she told a friend once that she had been so privileged to meet with such wonderful, interesting, historic figures as Queen, and she named Mother Teresa and Barack Obama.
Hey, we're speaking with Susan Paige. Her book is The Queen and Her Presence. She's also USA Today's Washington bureau chief. Was in the hotel Saturday night. We're going to keep talking to her after this quick break. Excuse me. We're going to say goodbye to those of you listening on NEPM, but we're going to stay with you.
We're not taking a break.
We're not taking a break, okay.
NEPM is saying goodbye.
NEPM is saying goodbye. We're going to keep going right here in Boston. Goodbye to NEPM.
You know, I was not aware until recently that it's fair. I should have known this. That the Queen doesn't do interviews. She did keep a diary. Do we have any expectation that would ever see the light of day, or is that also a violation of protocol?
She kept a diary her whole life. Can you imagine what must be in that? Although I talked to someone who had worked at the palace who said his fear was they would finally release the diary and it would say things like, you know, I had soup for lunch and went to bed early. Yeah, as opposed to the incredible insights she could have about world events. The diary is under the control of the Windsors. But I noticed that King Charles has named an official biographer of his mother, and I assume that she may have some special access to her diaries, although I don't know that, and those Windsor archives are very closely held.
Speaking of Charles, talk about great timing, which we rarely have.
Yeah.
We obviously have it today. Charles and Camilla will be arriving today. Is there any indication that Charles, who's no kid, but obviously a recent king, has any of the skills of his mother that you describe in the book?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's been pretty sure-footed since he became king, don't you? I mean, he sometimes wandered into controversy as prince, and he had kind of the star-crossed marriage with Diana, but I think he has been pretty much seemed to know what he's doing. He's certainly been raised all these decades to take over this role, and he did an important thing. So the first time he and Trump met on Trump's 2018 visit to London, they didn't really get along, and Trump complained afterwards that Charles was really boring and only wanted to talk about climate change.
I loved it.
That. Yeah, that's great.
But after that, on the next visit, they had a much better meeting, and then Charles did something Trump loved, which was invite him back for a second state visit, which went well. So Trump has now spoken really warmly of Charles, and this is Charles's role. Charles's role is at a time when the prime minister and the president are at loggerheads to somehow smooth these troubled waters and make things a little better.
You know, we are of the school that no matter how sycophantic you are with Donald Trump, you never really get paid back in a positive way. Prime Minister Starmer's performance in the Oval Office the day he read the proclamation talking about the second state visit I had to shield my eyes. As you referenced, he's been very critical of Starmer of late. Now, I don't understand how all the reporters whom I've read about the trip say one of the functions beyond celebrating the 250th anniversary, obviously, of the revolution, is to sort of paper over is a poor choice of words, move past that difficulty between Trump and Starmer. How is that not a political act? And if that's okay, why is talking to Donald Trump about his hoax position on the environment a political act? Do you understand? I don't know if I'm articulating well. Do you understand my question?
It's totally political. I don't think they're apolitical. They are totally political. But I think it's the reverse of papering over, because there's no papering over our dispute with Great Britain over the war in Iran, over the trade disputes, over the future of NATO. This trip will not solve those things. What it does is it kind of takes, rather than paper over, it's like it firms up the ground, so that it doesn't feel quite so much like we're about to float apart. It just reminds people that we've been Great Britain's best friend, and we've been BFFs with Great Britain since World War II. And it has served our interests sometimes, and it has definitely served Britain's interests as it loses its empire and no longer has an economy and a military that demands attention. It has given Great Britain a voice it would not otherwise have had. And that is something to keep in mind as you try to kind of muddle through what we see happening today.
Is it naive to think that there'll be a surprise and the king would actually meet with some Epstein survivors, as many of them have requested?
Yeah, that's naive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you do strike me as a naive person, so I'm not surprised you would suggest a thing like that.
You know, Susan Paige, we're out of time, but one real quick one before we go. What can you tell us about why the Queen carried the pocketbook all the time?
She kept stuff in it.
Yeah.
She kept it. Yeah. Wouldn't you, if you were going to, it's like she had a tiny umbrella.
Yeah.
I'd carry a purse too.
But
Also, it occupies your arm.
Yeah, it does. But she seemed like she had it on next to the couch if she was talking to somebody, or the chair, whatever you know what I mean? She didn't even need it there. I thought
she was devoted to her purse.
Devoted to her purse.
Hey,
okay.
since you were relatively candid with us, can I be candid with you?
Relatively candid?
Yes, you
No
were.
one has been more candid with you than I.
I had no interest in this book when we were
he's
told we had
always
to read it.
deriding the royals.
And I loved every
great.
single page of it.
Because she was underestimated,
well,
and she shouldn't have
the
been.
stories are brilliant. The representation of her role in history is perfect. It's really a spectacular work, and congratulations.
And the fact that no matter what
Susan.
she was asked, she always said, they're nice, everything's nice, everything's nice. I thought that showed a tremendous amount of restraint and discipline. I admired her for that.
It was great to have
But
you.
it would have been bad radio.
It would have been. It would have been.
That's right.
And I'm
That's
not
right.
faking it.
That's
Susan, I
right.
hope you come back. Thanks so much. Congratulations. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks very much.
Ditto. It's a great book. We have been speaking with Susan Paige, USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief, author of the new book, The Queen and Her Presidents, which is a great read. It's a page turner. The Queen and Her Presidents by Susan Paige. Thanks again for being with us, Susan Paige. Up next, we're going to talk with Daniel Dreiser from Tufts. He's an international politics professor there about the latest in Iran. I'm Margery Egan. He's Jim Browder. You're listening to BPR, GBH, NAPM, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Do your part to support the programs you love by becoming a GBH Sustainer. Sustainers make easy monthly donations that keep the news you trust on the air, month after month, year after year. Enrolling is simple at gbh.org/sustainer.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And MIT Federal Credit Union. Their mortgages are built around their members with personalized guidance. Memberships open to the public. More at mitfcu.org. Federally insured by NCUA, NMLS number 39923. And Safety Insurance, offering a variety of home insurance products to cover your home's increased value. You can ask an independent agent about Safety Insurance. Safety Insurance will help you manage life's storms.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. Jim Browder and Margery Egan. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Quick programming note, tomorrow, a twofer at the Boston Public Library. The governor will join us from 11 to noon, and then the mayor of Boston will join us from noon to 1, taking our questions and yours Friday, May 1st. A special Ken Casey as co-host show. He, of course, is the Dropkick Murphys, Ken Casey, and that's going to be a fantastic show. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Margery. We're joined now on Zoom by Daniel Dresner. He's a distinguished professor of international politics and academic dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. Dan Dresner, good to see you as always.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
Hello, Dan Dresner. Thank you for joining us. So what's the latest on Iran? Where are we today a little bit after noon on Monday?
Basically where we were a week ago and a week before that, which is to say that the ceasefire, and you should put that in quotes, is still holding to some extent, that the U.S. and Israel are no longer bombing Iran. That said, I believe we still have a mutual blockade in process where the U.S. is blockading Iran's ability to export oil and Iran is blockading everyone else's ability to export oil. There is ostensibly a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, but that has not stopped Israel from bombing Hezbollah. And I think the Trump administration is discovering the problems with a catastrophic success in terms of their decapitation strike, which is to say that it was successful. They did wipe out a lot of the top Iranian leadership. The problem they are encountering now, though, is that they don't know who they're negotiating with. And part of the issue here is that I don't think the Iranians are entirely clear as to who's, who has the authority to negotiate. So as a result, I'm not sure even in a proper negotiation, you would actually be able to have these countries get to a relatively quick resolution. But the current situation is ideal for nothing to be agreed upon.
Well, Donald Trump says we're in much better shape than you do. Here he is on the tarmac in Florida on April 25th talking about his decision to cancel the sending of his people for talks with Iran. Here he is.
When they want, they can call me. We have all the cards. We've won everything. We have all the cards.
So we have all the cards. We've won everything. What cards are they? What are the cards that we have all of? And what have we won exactly there, Dan Dresner?
Okay, I'm going to answer this by trying to give the sort of a longer version of what the Trump administration would probably say if you had one of their spokespeople on. Say what has been accomplished, to be fair, has been a destruction of a large amount of Iran's conventional military. Iran's conventional navy has been destroyed. It will take a long time for Iran to rebuild all of that. You have wiped out Iran's top leadership tier. And with the blockade that's in effect, Iran's economy is going to start hurting because it's going to be difficult for them to get oil out. Although I've seen reports suggesting they have been able somewhat to smuggle oil out past the U.S. So the idea is that I think what the administration is hoping is that they can play a waiting game. They can just wait for Iran to be brought to their knees. They know that the leadership is not terrifically popular based on what happened in terms of uprisings in December and January. And their hope is that they can wait longer than anyone else. The problem with that, and now I'll take my Trump administration defender hat off, is that Iran is also able to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. And so long as that happens, it's not just Iran that is suffering. It is also most of the Pacific Rim. It's going to increasingly be Europe. And indeed, it is going to increasingly be the global economy because you're talking about essentially not allowing 20% of the world's oil to get out. Not to mention the fact that in terms of LNG and natural gas, you've got a lot of sort of core components for other goods like fertilizer, like urea, and so forth. It's going to be increasingly difficult for the global economy to function as prices continue to go up. And, we're now, I think I heard on your station this morning that the average gas price in Massachusetts has now topped $4 for the first time since 2022. So if you take a look at any kind of public opinion polling on this, Trump has not done well as a result of this war, and it is hard for anyone to believe his claim that we hold all the cards. To be clear, Iran doesn't hold all the cards either. But one of the things that I think this administration is discovering and this president is discovering is you can't just unilaterally declare victory if the other side is continuing to make life difficult for you.
Well, also, it seems the one thing I totally subscribe to is the view of experts. I don't know if you're among them. You'll tell us in a second that he wants out of there as quickly as he possibly can and declare victory. It's hard to declare victory if your victory is opening the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before you attacked Iran on February 28th. It is one thing to say you've destroyed X percent of their weaponry, but if the end of the sentence does not include that there is an agreement to not build a nuclear weapon that's verifiable and enforceable, it seems to me that he'll have a hard time making a case that they've won everything. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, the administration listed a few sort of concrete aims they wanted at the very start of the war, the leading one of which was we don't want Iran to be able to develop a nuclear program. And one of the things that should be stressed is that nothing in this war has actually assisted in that outcome. There's been no attempt to seize the uranium that, the U.S. knows where it is, but that would be an extremely perilous special forces mission. The other problem, of course, is that, that Iran's ballistic missile capacity and drone capacity is potentially going to be able to be replenished as long as the ceasefire continues. And this doesn't even begin to talk about the sort of second and third order effects of all of this, which, among other things, include the fact that you've now had to lift the energy sanctions on Russia, which does seem sort of counterproductive to, what you're trying to do in terms of Ukraine. The fact that, you have a whole contingent of Trump administration officials that ostensibly thought that the most important strategic threat to the United States was China, and everything that is happening in the Middle East is a distraction from that. So no, strategically, this has been pretty close to an unmitigated disaster. And of course, the other issue is that it's not just that Trump can't declare victory and anyone will believe him. The rest of the world is keenly aware that he's not winning this. And so, for folks who claim, well, Trump has brought back a reputation for toughness, look at what he did in Venezuela, Iran is going to erase all of that.
I heard some interesting reporting from the New York Times from an Iranian who is well sourced in Iran, and the scenario she put forward was that the Ayatollah, his face and lips are so badly burned, supposedly he can't even talk. Never mind, he's going to be presentable at the moment, and that in that context, that Iran has moved from a theocracy to more of a military dictatorship, where the Iranian Guard is all in charge, and they want to make some money, and that one of they're less interested in praying, I guess, than dollars, and that even though they've got a safe face on both sides, Trump does too. This I hadn't heard before, that one of their ideas supposedly is that we start opening up Iran for business deals. The United States can invest in Iran, and oil companies can invest in Iran, and that would be something that these Revolutionary Guard people would like to do, which might also placate some of the people in Iran who have been going broke. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, what you're actually describing, I think, would be the Trump administration's dream outcome.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, that's what they want in Iran was essentially a replay of what happened in Venezuela, where they threw out a leader that was implacably opposed to the United States, put in a leader that really didn't fundamentally change the regime, but one that recognized that it had to do business with the United States. And so to the extent that you can count Venezuela as a foreign policy win for the administration, it is clear that that is what they wanted to replicate in Iran. Whether they can actually do that or not is entirely unclear. I've seen what, in part, this is the sort of unresolved question of who actually is running Iran. I think what your friend says in terms of the damage to Khatami's son, who's now taken over, is likely true, because you have to think that if he was in any way capable of recording a video or anything, they would have done that by now. So probably he is, severely incapacitated. On the Revolutionary Guard just wanting to do business, that is possible, but I would say that, this is where this regime seems to have, entrenched itself in such a way that I'm pretty sure that the selection of who was going to replace the top leadership probably would be a little too implacably opposed to cutting deals with the United States for that to be possible. Now, maybe there is intelligence that I'm not aware of that would contradict this, but all of the public reporting on this suggests that, if anything, the Iranian regime post-decapitation has, if anything, become more hardline, not less hardline.
We're talking to Dan Dresner, a distinguished professor of international politics and academic dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. By the way, since you mentioned Russia in passing, we should mention that while the Iranian foreign minister doesn't have time to meet with the United States, he is meeting with Putin. So that obviously has happened. So do a little Nostradamus here. How does this end, assuming the desire on the part of Trump is as great as it is? And getting back to what he can misrepresent and not, if he agreed to the Obama deal, assuming Iran would go for that, in terms of their nuclear capacity, there he can pretend that he got a better deal than Obama. But is there any reason to believe that the Iranians at this stage will agree to that? What's the outcome here?
If Marjorie's friends
she's not my friend. It's a report. It's a reporter.
If Marjorie's contact is if the reporter is correct, you could see an arrangement whereby there is some version of the JCPOA 2 that is signed. Of course, I would suspect that in that circumstance, the specifics would have to be kept secret, because I am extremely skeptical that Trump would be able to negotiate a better deal than what Obama got. Because among other things, the Iranians are understandably suspicious of any kind of negotiation, since The last two times they negotiated with the Trump administration bombed them while the negotiations were taking place.
And they keep sending back the same two people, Witkoff and Kushner, that were there, that double-crossed them, you could say. I don't get why they're doing that, since the Iranians have no reason to trust them.
Right. Now, if it's the case that you have a sort of a new leader who comes in who just, is sufficiently worried about regime survival such that he's willing to cut a deal with the United States, say, fine, we'll sign some JCPOA, we're going to demand massive amounts of investment, massive amounts of sanctions removal, and then we'll suddenly be your best friends in the region. I find it hard to believe that would actually be feasible. I mean, this regime is not terrifically popular with the Iranian people. But that said, you're talking about like 30 or 40% of the Iranian population that really are fervently, in support of the regime at a minimum. And it would be hard to see them swallowing the idea of suddenly, oh, we're now friends with the great Satan. I mean, this is the thing about revolutionary rhetoric. It winds up blowing back on yourself.
What you and Margery were just talking about reminded me that I'm embarrassed I didn't bring this before when you're talking about bombing them at the same time that Kushner and Witkoff were negotiating.
Twice.
We have moved a third aircraft carrier, I believe it is, into the region. And all of the military experts, without one exception, who I've read or heard in the last 48 hours, have said they've never seen something like that in a single region ever, which suggests to at least some of them that it may not just be a threat to help the negotiations, but an actual plan to attack. Do you subscribe to the latter notion, or?
There's an argument to be made for that. I mean, it really is, you're talking about committing a massive amount of men and materiel to a region, and there are opportunity costs for that. As I said, suddenly the Asia Pacific is less of a concern as far as the U.S. military is concerned. And, you're talking about people, sending them, deploying them. There are costs to that deployment. I think the Gerald R. Ford, which is the first carrier that's been out there, is setting a record for the number of days it's been, actually been deployed. And indeed, they had to, I think, dock in Greece because of a laundry fire, which was a little more serious than anyone acknowledged. If you're committing this many carriers, it does suggest you're planning something that it'll be hard to back down from. As to what that is, I would say one of two possibilities come to mind, and they're not mutually exclusive options. One is maybe they're going to try to seize Karg Island, as a way of putting additional pressure on Iran. The other possibility is that you're going to see a JSOC or Special Forces operation designed to eliminate or take out Iran's nuclear material that is buried deep under the mountain.
Which those same experts say is likely to lead to great number of American casualties.
Yes, absolutely.
So last thing from me, based upon my huge store of foreign policy experience, Dan Dresner, is I worry that when Trump realizes, if he hasn't already, how seriously damaged he's been politically by this unsuccessful war, he decides to do another misdirection play and do an easy one, the easy one being Cuba, which he has talked about in the past. Is it unreasonable to think that that could come right in the middle of this, or do we just not have the resources and person power to pull two things off at the same time?
It's not entirely unreasonable, although again, you mentioned the three carriers being in the Persian Gulf. That's one fewer carriers that you would have available in Cuba. Of course, Cuba's only 90 miles away, so you don't necessarily need that as much. It is entirely possible that is what he will do. I mean, Trump is attracted to the idea of regime change in Cuba. If there's one through line in terms of this administration, particularly in the second term, it is the idea that Trump is attracted to solving problems, or at least attempting to solve problems that he thinks multiple previous administrations have not been able to tackle, whether it is Iran, whether it is the Maduro regime in Venezuela, or Cuba is in some ways the oldest of all of these. You're talking about, administrations that go back to John F. Kennedy that no one has been able to solve. And indeed, in a weird way, the Iran operation has distracted everyone from the fact that we are essentially enforcing a blockade on Cuba. And the question will be, how hard can you squeeze? And will you then have a situation where, some upper tier administrator in Cuba decides to essentially want to become the next Delcy Rodriguez? The other thing about Cuba that's worth bearing in mind is that in contrast to Iran, where Marco Rubio has, despite the fact that he's National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, seemingly playing no role whatsoever in the Iran negotiations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Is deeply interested in Cuba for obvious reasons. And so, as Rubio stars on the rise in some ways for a whole bunch of reasons, I'm sure he would want to notch a win in Cuba if it was possible. The other thing that one might imagine is that the Iran debacle might be teaching the administration that you shouldn't take for granted the idea that everything is going to work out the way the Venezuela operation did.
By the way, for the three people who don't know what Daniel was referencing, Rubio is Cuban-American, needless to say. Yeah. Dan Dresner, we really appreciate your insight, as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for joining us, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
We have been speaking with Daniel Dresner, a distinguished professor of international politics and academic dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Okay, coming up after this quick break, an update on the Boston